morning. It's Tuesday, August 15th, 2017. Yesterday afternoon, President Trump again addressed the deadly violence that took place in Charlottesville, Virginia over the weekend, this time specifically calling out the KKK, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists and the racism they represent. But those who track the activities of organized hate groups have found that the number of such groups are increasing around the country. This morning on the Washington Journal, we want to know what you think may be behind the rise in hate groups. We split our phone lines by age for this morning's discussion. If you're under 30 years old, phone number for you, 202-748-8000. If you're 30 years old to 50 years old, 202-748-8001. If you're 50 years old and older, it's 202-748-8002. You can also catch up with us on social media. On Twitter, it's at CSpanWJ. On Facebook, it's facebook.com/cspan. A very good Tuesday morning to you. Our question for you this morning: why are hate groups on the rise? You can start calling in now. As we said, we've split our phone lines up by age for this discussion. And as you do call in, some of President Trump's comments from yesterday condemning specific white supremacist groups and the racism they represent.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans.
But when it comes to some of those white supremacist groups, U.S. security agencies warning that white supremacists were a growing threat 3 months before the violence that took place in Charlottesville, Virginia. This report from the Daily News yesterday. The FBI and Homeland Security issued a notice in a May 10th bulletin titled "White Supremacist Extremism Poses Persistent Threat of Lethal Violence." In the 8-page briefing, the agency notes that the neo-Nazis, white nationalists, and KKK have committed more violent acts than any other domestic extremist group in the 21st century. The racial supremacy groups were responsible for 49 homicides and 26 attacks from 2000 to 2016. One group that tracks these hate groups around the country is the Southern Poverty Law Center. They have a chart, hate groups 1999 to 2016. We can show it to you, showing the rise of hate groups over the course of that time. It dipped for a while after 2012 to 2014 and on the rise again. The Southern Poverty Law Center in their reports 917 hate groups in 2016, remaining at near historic highs, they say, rising from 892 in 2015. That's only 100 fewer organizations than the 1,018 organizations that were tallied in 2011, which was the all-time high in the 30 years that SPLC had made their count. Their data noting by far the most dramatic change was the enormous leap in anti-Muslim hate groups from 34 in 2015 to 101 last year. That's a 197% increase. The number of neo-Confederate groups, organizations like the League of the South, which seeks a second Southern secession, rose by 23% from 35 to 43 groups. But the number of Klan chapters fell 32%. From 190 groups in 2015 to 130 in 2016. Because the Klan's groups numbers have expanded rapidly earlier, they note, in early years some constriction had been expected. Those are some of the numbers. We'll go through more of the numbers from SPLC's reporting, but want to hear from you this morning. Why are hate groups on the rise? Why do you see the rise in that chart, specifically over the past 3 years, but since the turn of the century? Want to hear from you this morning. Jack's up first, Providence, Rhode Island, on that line for 30 to 50-year-olds. Jack, good morning.
Good morning to you. This is a problem both on the left and on the right. More and more people are feeling, I'm not in this situation, fortunately, economic insecurity. And, no matter how well we'll say the country's doing right now as far as jobs coming back, the money is being held by a select group of international financial elites that run the show. Now, they're primarily left of center people, actually. They're primarily in New York, on Wall Street, and they're in Hollywood. They're also in London, and they're in Zurich.
So, Jack, you think this financial insecurity makes people sort of retreat into these groups, these hate groups? What drives the increase specifically in the hate groups?
Well, because they feel, that's a good question. They feel that, they want to have a good standard of living, and it's being taken from them. And so that's when the hate starts to percolate. Okay, and then it grows and grows. You see the country, in severe debt right now, and these things go on worldwide. The money is held by a select few people.
All right, got your point. Bubba's up next. Dallas, Texas, line for 50 and older. Bubba, good morning.
Good morning to you. About 10 years ago, I was president of a social club here in Dallas that was for those of us over 65 years of age. One day we didn't have a speaker, so we had a general conversation. Someone brought up the thought that within the next 10 to 15 years there would be an armed revolution in this country. Now, these people in this club were over 65 years of age. The average person was a college graduate. They had people who had made a success of their lives, and they. So I said, let's take a vote and see just exactly who thinks there'll be an armed revolution in this country at about 10 or 15. This was 10 years ago. About 90% of those who in the group voted yes, there would be an armed revolution. Now, this was not a group of rednecks. This was not a group of communists. This was just a group of average citizens that had made a success of their lives.
And why were they?
I think they're right on schedule for an armed revolution. It's going to occur. One group of people in this country are forcing crap on the other ones, and the others are not going to take it. Thank you.
Malik, Arlington, Texas, line for 30 to 50-year-olds. Good morning.
How you doing this morning? First of all, I'd like to say that the overwhelming majority of these white people that came to this country came in after the Civil War. They have no reason to be chronically aggrieved. They come here from fascist nations. They came here with a fascist agenda. They came here from authoritarian type of nations. They came here with all these mindsets of white entitlement. They came here, they received free land grabs, they had government aid, farm aid, subsidized housing, education. They never put into the system. They came here with this agenda. The Italians fought with Hitler under Mussolini. They've had this mindset since they came here. This is no surprise. Nancy Reagan was a part of the Communist Party. She was a card-carrying communist, but she was revered. This has nothing about the rise of hate groups. This has always been here. The White Citizens Council was mainly objective was to make sure that the financial interests of this country went to white people, mainly white immigrants from Europe and other nations to come in and benefit financially.
Malik, let me ask you, we started off the conversation talking about the numbers from the Southern Poverty Law Center. They're tracking hate groups. They track all kinds of hate groups, and it's not just white supremacists and white nationalist organizations that they track. 193 total black separatist groups in 2015 as well. What do you think is causing this rise in this country, and what would be your suggestion for bringing it back together?
Well, there is no rise of any. This is what I'm trying to tell you. These people have always existed. This mindset has always existed. The fact that you say there's a black separatist group is nonsensical, because black people have been the victims of all sorts of violence and intimidation and terrorist acts that have been perpetrated upon them by the oldest known terrorist group in the country. Now, I know you're looking for an answer to why there's a rise in said groups, but from my observation, from black folks losing jobs and black folks losing any type of career opportunities due to racism, there is no rise in these groups. These people have always existed. Now, they may be mobilizing in greater numbers. They may be arming themselves in greater numbers, but they've always existed. Like I said, when you have a system that's predicated upon white entitlement and white supremacy, you cannot count numbers based on who's mobilizing. These people have always existed. They came from fascist nations. They came from authoritarian mindsets. The Italians came here under the guise of Mussolini.
Got your point, Malik. Herbert, Line for those 50 and older. Camilla, Georgia. Good morning. Herbert, you with us?
Yes, I've been watching C-SPAN for 15 years. And for the last thing, and I appreciate every one of you. And the thing is that I found out that in this society right now, we got these hate groups as originating. If you bring up the facts and statistics, and show these groups that the thing that you talking about, you want to take your country back with the Tea Party and make America great again. Do bring up the facts and statistics and let them know as a percentage of white Americans control got 2/3 of the world's wealth, almost all the major corporations, finance institutions, everything else. So who are you trying to take your country back from when they're a percentage of the ones who controlling it? So that's a myth right there. So you know what they're trying to do. They're trying to bring it back. The ones who over 50 and 60 years, they enjoyed that privilege of seeing a black and a white bathroom. They enjoyed that privilege of going to restaurants and schools by themselves. They don't want to see this multicultural country as it is to come together in love. This was going on in Herbert, America right now. Donald Trump is 70 years old. Trump experienced this, man.
So who is they, Herbert, when you say they don't want to see it? You're classifying who?
The poor of white Americans who enjoyed that privilege, of separating themselves from other nationalities.
You think most white Americans want to see that back?
Some of the older ones want to see that. A lot of those older ones who feel like, now, you got to remember, KKK came out in 1866. This place is, they no different than ISIS. They burnt and hung people in America. You got to remember that. We don't want this type of attitude towards, I don't care if it's black or whatever. What you saying now that, where they always want to compare Farrakhan or the Black Panther. The Black Panther came out in 1966. They ain't never hung nobody. They never burned people. They never went on no white people suburbs and moved them out their houses. And I'm talking about they've been using their Second Amendment rights, whereas blacks could not use their Second Amendment right to protect themselves against these people. Because if you'd have killed the white man back then on that time, any other circumstances.
Got your point, Herbert. We've split our phones up by age this morning, having this discussion, talking about it across generations. Want to hear from those under 30, 202-748-8000, those 30 to 50 years old, 202-748-8001, those 50 and older, 202-748-8002. Catherine Rampel, in her column in today's Washington Post, looks at this generational issue. She writes, yes, there were swastika tattooed Ku Klux Klan hooded 50-somethings on the streets of Charlottesville over the weekend. The most chilling photos, however, show hordes of torch-bearing, fresh-faced, fashy-coiffed white men in their teens and 20s. Some marchers in this youth brigade are still students, one the leader of a campus chapter of the College Republicans. She writes that the public faces of the white supremacy alt-right movement are likewise skewing younger. These are not people with backwardness that we can write off as an unfortunate product of their time. She goes into this discussion of generations and what's going to happen with the next generation. We want to hear from you, your thoughts on that, especially as we have this discussion about the rise of hate groups in this country and why is there a rise in hate groups. Benjamin, Parkton, North Carolina. Line for those under 30. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well.
Thank you, C-SPAN. These statues and all have stood for 100 years, and it is part of history and all and everything. And I think these groups that want to tear these statues down and all this would just leave them alone. Them statues are not hurting anybody, and the rebel flag is not hurting anybody. And all, like I say, it is part of history. And all, Robert E. Lee, and if you want to, why don't we tear down Grant and Sherman? Look what Sherman done in the South, and everything. I think if they and all.
So Benjamin, do you think it's this fight over what is American history, what it represents? Do you think that is contributing to the rise of hate groups?
Well, the history is the history, and you can tear down all the statues, and you can tear down everything else, but you can't go back 150 years and relive the Civil War and all. It's history. It's in the history books and all. And I think what these groups want to do is just wipe out the history of the Civil War.
Tedla, Flushing, New York. Line for those 50 and older. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, sir. For me, what I see now, the manifestation of extremist groups, is a manifestation of the history of this country, period. I mean, America didn't go through its history. It didn't correct its slavery system, just try to redress it somehow. The hate is there, period. For me, when I came to this country, what I learned, America has been divided like that was on O.J. Simpson's verdict. I was really shocked to see that, how Americans are divided by race, period. Almost all whites on one side and almost all blacks on one side. 1994, that was a warning for me as a newcomer. I see this
and has it gotten better or worse since then, Tedla?
It is getting worse. For me, I see it through university campuses, how the children are reacting. The students have already divided themselves. You have a black seat, a white seat, Asian seat. So this insanity, this generation of lack of understanding, it is not there. So for me, these extremist groups, what they do for us is that what we are seeing it in every part of our life, they took it to another level and show us that, oh, you guys, we don't like you no more. We don't like you and we don't belong here. That's what they did. So blaming them is not going to redress the problem. They are criminal things. They have to be punished. But the idea is there. We should not fool ourselves. This has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It makes me sick when people are trying to connect this with Donald Trump's election. It is not. We elected a black man. This thing didn't go. We can re-elect again another nice guy, nice-looking guy. It didn't go along. This is a fundamental problem in this country. We try to hide it. We try not to solve it. We try to just gloss over it. We are divided. New York State statistically is a divided state.
That's Tedla in New York. The Southern Poverty Law Center seeks to show the rise in these hate groups, the location of these hate groups on their website, mapping them out specifically with different dots representing different kinds of hate groups around the country. If you want to go to the Southern Poverty Law Center website, it's splcenter.org, and you can see the charts that we've been discussing so far this morning and their research there. Benjamin, Odenton, Maryland, line for those 30 to 50 years old. Good morning.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I really enjoy C-SPAN. I think that Trump's election really kind of galvanized these groups in that, from the very beginning, right when he announces his candidacy, he's calling Mexicans murderers and rapists. It took him over a week to disavow David Duke, and finally he did it in the most lukewarm terms possible. He has a history of really kind of going low on race. He really, and one thing I kind of want to address too is a prior caller said that the Confederate flag isn't hurting anyone, and in my opinion, like the iconography of the Confederate flag, it doesn't have any use anymore other than being used as a hate symbol. It's a symbol of oppression. So that's why minorities in our country are so up in arms over the use of it.
Thanks for the call, Benjamin. Diane, Asbury Park, New Jersey, 50 and older. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, C-SPAN. Calling because I want to say a couple of things. You can't talk about slavery and racism if you sincerely don't talk about forgiveness, forgiving the white man. Many black people have never forgiven the white man, okay? And this is what is needed on behalf of our children, because the children and even some adults hate white people. Okay, Martin Luther King, when he marched, he was in the spirit. He walked with God. He had an anointing on his life. There's evidence all over the place. After he died, black people dropped the ball for the longest, looking for a leader. There's only one real leader, that's Jesus. And the Jews did good because they, every now and then you hear about the Holocaust, but they're prosperous. They're not killing each other. They're every now and then you hear about the Holocaust. If you throw up into somebody's face about what they did to you in the past, all the time, every week, this, that, and the other, they're going to be ready to do something. Okay. Now, this is a part of why, they feel like they got to get out and defend the statue, okay? The statue is history, that's right. But there shouldn't be bloodshed over a statue. Hello?
I'm listening, Diane. Go ahead.
Okay, and I thank you very much for giving me a everybody have a great day, and let's stop this craziness.
Diane in New Jersey this morning. Senator Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina, with a op-ed in today's USA Today, talking about the Charlottesville attack, what it means in today's society. The attack was a stark reminder of the darkness of hate, he writes. We must come together as we have before to confront the issues that chip away at the foundation of who we are and what we stand for. Am I angry that racism exists in this country that I love so dearly? Absolutely. But I know that it is not indicative of the vast majority of Americans. I also know that our best chance to defeat racism is in continually expressing our most American of ideals, that we are one nation made of many peoples, one nation under God. Joseph, Fort George, Meade, Maryland. Line for those under 30. Good morning.
Hi, how are you today?
Doing well.
I was just calling to basically say that I think this is more or less political in nature. That I think it's rather coincidental that all this racial and national divide happens when Donald Trump takes office. Now, I think that there is more or less a political agenda that is driving this narrative. Now, I grew up in Virginia. I grew up in Appomattox, to be more specific, and I spent a lot of time in Charlottesville. And there's festival down there, everything. And I've never personally experienced or seen any type of racism. Now, be it that I'm from Appomattox, now we grow up with the Confederate flag everywhere. It's where the Civil War ended. I mean, I grew up 5 minutes away from the courthouse. And these people that I live with, still white, black, Mexican, we even have a Muslim community right down the road from my home where I used to live. And there is no divide whatsoever. Now, I'm not denying that racism exists in this nation, but what I am going to say is that I think it's rather peculiar that you have the 2018 elections coming up. The Democrats are pushing their agenda. The Republicans are pushing their agenda. Then you have this issue going on with the statues, and it's history. That's what it is. It's history. And they take it to a small city in Virginia that is pretty much backed off of, historical things, mostly leading to the Civil War. And it's a lot of these small counties' revenue with the reenactments and everything. And a lot of these demonstrators, these neo-Nazis and these white supremacists and what have you, they're coming from out of state. Heck, they even said that the guy that drove the vehicle into the crowd of people, he was from Ohio or something like that.
Ohio is the state that he was from. So what should happen next time? These groups are looking to target other cities and places as well. A report on the front page of the New York Times today, making arrangements for future marches. One of these white nationalists based in Texas is looking to have a White Lives Matter march on September 11th on the campus of Texas A&M. Another rally that might happen. How do you keep from happening what we saw in Charlottesville at something like that is now being promoted for just a few weeks away?
Well, one thing that could possibly be, taken into effect is that there are several different, organized marches that take place all over this country. Black Lives Matter, Antifa does marches, and they are able to,
Joseph, you're going in and out. Sorry about the connection. Adam is in Pennsylvania. That line for those 30 to 50 years old. Good morning.
Hey, John. Thanks for C-SPAN. Love the conversation this morning. A lot of this, I think, is from just overall victimization of our culture and how that plays into politics. I think the Democratic Party has gone strong into that vein. Everybody's kind of recoiling into these subgroups based and divided on religion, race, and that's why you see it perking up. I mean, as we know, you kind of were mentioning, it isn't just these white organizations. It's Black liberation theology. It's people like Maxine Waters, entertaining the concept of creating a black party. And I think sometimes with this white nationalism, what you're seeing is one half of the country, and I'm going to put it kind of to the Democratic Party, is not making a place for the white heterosexual male in their party. And what's happening is these people are getting, these white hate groups are getting very reactionary because they see that they are not allowed to have any white identity. As minority groups go into their pockets, and we have, let's say, the Black congressional groups or anything of this type of nature,
but Adam,
there's no white equivalent.
Why does that have to be expressed in a hate group? Aren't there other avenues to do that isn't a hate group that's having marches and violence like we saw over the weekend?
I think the hate groups are abhorrent. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. I'm just trying to get to the point of why are these white folks out there acting this way? And I think it's because of marginalization. That, yes, somebody can make the case, they're losing the power. White man is losing the power in this culture, and that's why they're acting out. But I think it's the real lack that they're not allowed to have white identity. You can't be white in this culture. There's no white groups. There's black groups, there's Hispanics groups, there's La Raza, there's NAACP, there's all these other type of organizations that are centered around the victimization of minority organizations, minority groups. And the white heterosexual male, I think especially in the South, is feeling that they are being backed into a corner and they are being marginalized in a corner, and then they're lashing out. And I just want to say one last point here. The last gentleman was trying to talk about it as well. America needs to also wake up to the violence that's going on with Antifa and these quote anti-fascists that are really putting down any concept of First Amendment freedom of speech. They've been very violent. There's Trump supporters getting assaulted in every major city in this country, and it's absolutely disgusting. And when we go to these protests, and for years, all the way back through Bush and the original Iraq War protests, these people are anarchist communists. They're burning U.S. flags. They're waving communist flags, and they're assaulting people, hitting people with bike locks, spraying people with urine, and really they're inspiring some of this violence. So, when Trump got nailed, I guess on Saturday by some in the media for saying that both sides, that's what he's talking about here, is we all need to try to take a breath. Hey, thank you, John.
It's Adam in Pennsylvania this morning. A helpful note from my producer. Read the story about the planned Texas A&M rally. A more recent story posted online overnight. Texas and A&M has canceled the White Lives Matter rally that was set to be held on its campus in College Station next month. After consultation with law enforcement and considerable study, Texas A&M is canceling that event scheduled by Preston Wigton of Rudder Plaza on campus on September 11th, according to a statement sent by the university, reported first by the Texas Tribune. So an update on that story. Appreciate that. Ashley is in Peoria, Arizona. Line for those under 30. Good morning.
Good morning. There's a few things I wanted to say. Thank you for having the broadcast. So, in my opinion, the opposite of white supremacy is black power. And that is what they do not want. They do not want black people to have power. I also learned on the documentary MAAFA 21 about the eugenics. And, you know, white people want them to recreate with other white people, which in my opinion is not a problem because, in my opinion, I want black people to recreate with other black people. However, they don't want us to have power, you know, to be in positions where we own and operate and control things.
Actually, to be clear, who feels that way? When you say white people, are you saying all white people? Who feels
No, I wouldn't say every single one because there are allies. There are people who share common interests as far as just not having to hate and not whatever. But for the majority, yes, because
you think the majority of white people don't want to see intermarriage?
I think majority of people, period, no matter what you look like, did not want to give up what they have for another. And if you're in control and you don't want to give up your have so that you can split it with somebody you don't care about. If this was my family, it'd be no problem for me to make sure my children have money. It's no problem for them to make sure their children have opportunity. But for me, I'm not related to them. They don't care about me, so they don't want to take what they have and share that with me. The next thing I wanted to say was I feel like if Black Lives Matter had a rally and they had a car drive into a crowd, there would not be an option for them to have another rally. Already against, and now I understand it might have been canceled, but the fact that they was even able to set it up is ridiculous.
Actually,
ridiculous.
To that
because
point,
they didn't even denounce it. I have not heard one of those groups come out and say, we were not connected to that man who drove that car in. None of those protesters, racist ones, Nazi ones, all of them, none of them have come out and said that. So therefore they stand with that, and they should not be allowed to get another permit to do another thing.
Actually, to that point, I'd point you to Stephen Henderson's column in today's USA Today. Seems to agree with you that there are many lessons to draw from what happened in Charlottesville, not the least of which is the emboldened face of racist expression, but the one that stands out is the imbalance. We live in a nation where aggrieved African Americans are told pretty routinely to watch themselves and not get out of line. Lawful acts often lead to violent responses or death, as we have seen so often with police shootings captured on video. But a group of torch-bearing white men can march and chant racist slogans, and it's seen as a protest, not a riot. And there's the imbalance mooring here too. Black rage, as Baldwin has said, is at its roots, has its roots in history and the present. If you want to read more from his column today, USA Today. Lenada, Rainsville, Alabama, line for those 50 and older. Lenada, good morning.
Yes, good morning. I am from the South. I'm a Southern country girl, and I'm proud of it. I am not racist. Some of my best friends are black people. But there are certain groups of black people that think we owe them something. The majority of us was not here when the slavery was going on. But that it's been carried over, and it's a reflection on us, and it shouldn't be that way. As far as the marching people, I think it all should stop. I think this is a sign of the Bible fulfilling. I don't know if you're a Bible-believing person, but this is the Bible fulfilling. And these people are participating in it. And the older people, the parents of these people that are out here doing these marches and fighting and all this stuff, what do the parents think? Are the parents promoting this? Are they standing beside them in this? If they are the ones that are in the wrong. And I just want to close by saying we should not say, God bless America. America should bless God. And this needs to stop. We're having an election in Alabama today for Roy Moore, Mo Brooks, Luther Strange and all of these people. And, you know, my belief is marriage is between one man and one woman, not woman and woman and man. So Roy Moore will be getting my support today. And America, bless God.
That's Laneda in Alabama, bringing up that special election that's taking place today. This is to fill the seat of Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, his seat in the Senate. Luther Strange was appointed to that position and is running in the primary today. There's also a primary taking place on the Democratic side. We'll talk a little bit more about that primary, its potential to go to a runoff. Going to be talking about it with an Alabama reporter at about 9:30 this morning, so stick around for that. And one other story to point you to in other news happening around the country, this focusing on comments President Trump told Fox News that he's seriously considering issuing a presidential pardon to former Arizona County Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and said it could come in the next few days. Mr. Arpaio was convicted in federal court earlier this year of contempt of court after a judge ruled that he willfully defied another judge's orders to cancel his policy of traffic stops aimed at sniffing out illegal immigrants in his county. The former sheriff, who lost his re-election bid in November, is due to be sentenced in October. And of note, just not too long ago, President Trump retweeted a Fox News story about that exact topic. The president, with that retweet on his own Twitter page, President Trump seriously considering a pardon for Joe Arpaio. Back to your calls as we're having this conversation about why hate groups are on the rise in this country. Want to get your thoughts on that and what can be done to fix the situation, to try to move back towards some sort of coming together in this country away from that rise. Phone lines for those under 30, 202-748-8001. For those 30 to 50, 202-748-8002. For those 50 and older, 202-748-8002 for those 50 and older. Juanita is in Cincinnati, Ohio, on that line. Thanks for figuring out the lines amid me messing up the phone numbers. Go ahead, Juanita.
66 on Thursday, but I have two items.
Early happy birthday to you.
Thank you. I have two items. I am responding to the lady, Diana, who called, saying that, and the one just before me saying that we should put certain hates and dislikes behind us. My great-grandfather, Russell Dillard, died in 1940. He was freed at 15 years old by William Tecumseh Sherman in 1864. My mother, 86, is sitting in Indian Spring Nursing Home, has told that story down to her children and great-grandchildren. My grandfather himself died at 100 years old, World War I vet. Now, as a family, are we supposed to sit down and not dislike a system that virtually almost destroyed our family? I mean, we're talking about things that have happened within people's lifetime. So this is not something that just happened 100 years ago. He died in 1940. My mom's 86, and he came up here to live 3 years before he died, and he was a slave, and he was freed by William Tecumseh Sherman, and his name was Russell Dillard. That's number one. Number two, these groups have always been here. And as a historical point for you folks who keep saying the NAACP, the NAACP was founded in 1909, 1906 because entire black families were being lynched in the South by white men. So get your history straight. These groups are not new. They've simply become emboldened. And I don't even want to tell you what's happened in my lifetime. I'm sure the FBI has a dossier for me, because I've been reaching Hill all my life.
Juanita, can I ask, you say these groups have been emboldened. I guess that's the point of our question this morning. Why have they been emboldened? They've been emboldened because they've been given permission by not my president, but by the president and the Republican Party. That's been the one problem to me of the Republican Party the last 40 years. How have they been given permission, Juanita? They've been given permission to say what they want to say so that people can be elected. To me, the Republican point to win, I'm like, look at Ronald Reagan when he opened his initial presidential campaign in 1978. He
did in Philadelphia, Mississippi. We know what happened in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Stoner, Goodman, and those 3 boys that were killed in Mississippi. Why did he do that? See, this is what I'm saying is when you come and tell people, give them the soul message, well, what you did may not have been that bad. Well, what's the next step?
Well, Juanita, here's more of the president's statement from yesterday.
As I said on Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. And as I have said many times before, no matter the color of our skin, we all live under the same laws. We all salute the same great flag. And we are all made by the same Almighty God. We must love each other, show affection for each other, and unite together in condemnation of hatred, bigotry, and violence. We must rediscover the bonds of love and loyalty that bring us together as Americans. Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. We are a nation founded on the truth that all of us are created equal. We are equal in the eyes of our Creator. We are equal under the law, and we are equal under our Constitution. Those who spread violence in the name of bigotry strike at the very core of America.
And 2 different takes on the president's comments yesterday. The first from the editorial page of the New York Times, the editorial board going with the headline, Mr. Trump talks at last. Will he act? He managed to get some of the right words out about white supremacists, but it was just a start, is what the editorial board writes. And then Wes Pruden in today's Washington Times writes that whatever this president would say, his partisan critics and media were waiting to pick it apart and find it wanting. He could never say it strong enough, is what Wes Pruden writes in his column. A few comments from Twitter as we've been having this discussion about the president's statements, about hate groups in this country. Kevin says, where Steve Bannon is your senior advisor, nothing you say about equality matters. Donna says, as many people have said, there have always been in the shadows talking about hate groups. They are being encouraged to come out with Trump's rhetoric. Carol Olds, hate groups are on the rise because there is plenty of hate to go around. Leftist hate is very strong. Did you add all the murders in Chicago? And Sandy writes in, we know the radical left well. Statues are only the beginning. Banning reenactors, the Civil War Roundtable, and books to come. I want to hear from you this morning. Phone numbers for those under 30, it's 202-748-8000. For those 30 to 50 years old, 202-748-8001. And for those 50 and older, 202-748-8002. CJ, Charlotte, North Carolina, line for 30 to 50-year-olds. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I just think there's an extreme emotional and irrational focus on the Confederate flag, meaning that it's just based on racism, where those who want to remove it have some severe insensitivity, meaning that the Civil War and the Confederates fought. Both soldiers lost their lives. And on the Confederate side, you still have families who are touched by this. And this is never spoke about in the news. It's just completely political. And there's a distorted view of history and education in this country. And it sort of symbolizes the blue and red states with the Confederates in the Civil War. And I think more attention needs to be, placed on that because, I don't know, the left or the radicals, I think they're void of some parts of history and they kind of want to shape it to their own. I mean, both sides, they want to, kind of design it in their way, but I think more needs to be understood of the core purpose of what the Confederate flag actually stands for.
CJ, you talk about families being touched by the Civil War. You say families who had ancestors who were in the Confederacy. Did you listen to the caller just a few minutes ago who talked about families being touched by slavery, the ancestors that she had who were slaves?
Yes, absolutely.
And what did you think of her story?
I think that I'm not sure she understands the Confederacy, what the war stood for. Everybody wanted their freedom. And I think that if people understood all sides, they would have compassion for everyone. And so if you just put its roots on racist Confederates, you're also denying the soldiers who fought in the war as well.
But what about the side of the slaves that were her ancestors that would not have had their freedom?
I also have slave ancestors. But it comes to a point where it's history and you have to move forward. You know, George Washington, a lot of the founding fathers of our country were slave owners. What are we supposed to do? Tear up money? Rip down their monuments? I mean, where does it end? And I'm also a veteran. So it's like you just have to have respect for history, what freedom stands for, and what it means to fight for it. So if you want to keep fighting everyone, we'll just be in this repetitive state of hate.
Kristen is up next. Greenbelt, Maryland, line for those under 30. Good morning.
Good morning. The last caller basically stole a lot of what I was going to say, but I believe that people who believe that the Confederates were more complicated than that and weren't just pure evil, they feel really they've been marginalized, and people think that they're evil and that the Confederate flag is just a symbol of slavery because the media feeds off of, especially like the liberal media that has like a largely minority audience, feeds off of bad news sells, so they like to tell people that it's a symbol of evil and hatred.
I think we lost you there, Kristen, but got your point. Gigi, Astoria, New York, those 50 and older, good morning.
Yes, good morning. I'm going to give you a brief education. The only reason why people have different skin colors is because of the region and proximity of the sun. We have different skin colors because of where we live in relevance to the sun. And it has nothing to do with being greater, more educated, better, richer, poorer. People don't seem to realize skin color is just something to protect us from the sun. It's a texture. If you live in a region where the sun is strong, you need to be a little darker. If you live in a region where there's no sun, you need to be a little lighter so you can absorb more heat and more light. I don't know where these people get their education. They taught me that in third grade. I'm Mexican, American, and Italian. I know prejudice from day one. I probably was the first Mexican in Astoria. I mean, where do these people get their education? Skin color is only to protect you from the sun. Let's get that straight. People are prejudiced because they're ignorant. And I can't say much more about that.
Anna in Chicago, line for those 30 to 50. Good morning.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was wondering this, what people think about this multicultural society that America is trying to build. It's not going to work. It's not working. You can't throw in a bunch of people from everywhere in the world and expect a melting pot. There is no melting pot.
So what's the alternative, Anna?
I think it's gone too far. And this is what's happening. You know, I see it all around me. I live in Chicago. And what's happening in Chicago is black people are on fire. You know, and I'm really afraid. I live on the north side of Chicago. I don't live on the south side where you hear of all these black on black killings. That's not happening in my neighborhood. What's happening in my neighborhood on the north side, I live in a condo. You know, I've got a good job, good salary. People are terrified because people are coming in from everywhere. They've got all these expectations. They're changing the neighborhood. And everybody's trying to move out, but we can't move out because, you know, it's hard to sell property, you know. And, oh, my God, it's terrible. I don't know what's going on. You know, I'm a black woman. You know, I'm 48 years old. I've lived here since I was in my early 30s. And I'm just, I don't know what's going on. I don't know how we're ever going to stop this. That's all I have to say. I'm sorry.
In today's Washington Post, a story, researchers exploring the roots of racism and how to stop it. The reporters on that story talking to researchers who study the roots of racism. Jennifer Richardson, one of those from Yale University, saying the only way to change bias is to change culture. You have to change what is acceptable in society. People today complain about politically correct culture, but what that does is provide a check on people's outward attitude, which in turn influences how we think about ourselves internally. Everything we're exposed to gives us messages about who is good and who is bad. And one more comment on that topic from Eric Knowles, psychology professor at New York University, agreeing that norms can serve as a check on expression of violent racism, but to change the deep-seated prejudices that shape our behavior, to unlearn our implicit biases, we need contact. It's absolutely the opposite of what white nationalists want, which is a segregated society. We need an integrated society and at the same time need to create as much socioeconomic fairness as we can so that relationships people have across group lines are egalitarian relationships. That's the one thing that can create trust between people on each side of the us-them divide, and the only thing in the long term that I would put my money on to reduce prejudices. If you want to read that story, today's Washington Post. Estelle in Memphis, Tennessee, line for those 50 and older. Good morning.
Good morning. I just wanted to say that I don't think things are going to change immediately. I feel that what's going to take place. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that what I think will happen is that in time it'll change. It'll take on a new color, altogether. But it's so deep rooted in this country. I mean, we celebrate people, and the flag, I feel like it should go because it's a symbol of hate, and there's a whole race of people that flag meant such ugly things for. And we can celebrate, let's say, Jefferson, but when you look at the things that he did in his life, it's not so pretty. With Sally Hemings, that young child, we look at our history, there's too much there. And in regards to the president making a comment, I feel like he should have, but of course he didn't in time. And then what is it really doing? After the fact, so many days later, it's things like that that kind of keep that wheel rolling. And I feel that it's going to continue to roll. And frankly, I just question why all of a sudden now with this particular bash, is there such an outcry for it to stop? Because it's been going on for such a long time.
Juanita in Kentucky, Oneida, Kentucky, line for those under 30. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Oneida.
Sorry
and
about that.
All of the Juanitas were calling in. I thought I should just put me, Kentucky, in there. So I'm from Dayton, Ohio originally. I'm under 30, and I moved to rural Kentucky because my town that I grew up in has always been racially charged, and it's really sad. And I wanted to give props to Juanita in Alabama because she hit it on the head. It's all about what the Lord wants us to be, and it's all about what the Lord has said about what's coming.
Mike, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, those 30 to 50 years old. Good morning. Go ahead, Mike.
I think people need to get real about this alt-right. They are white supremacists. They are Nazis. They don't believe that all men are created equal. They don't believe black people are equal to whites. They don't believe Jews are equal to Christians. So they don't even believe in America in the first place. That's the major problem. And, white people, I am white. I'm from Pittsburgh, but I moved here down to Tampa. And I actually went to a protest, a vigil, because what happened to that girl really got to me, and I wanted to do something. So here in Tampa, there's a Confederate statue right outside the courthouse, and it's still up, and we're trying to get it down. But, I think white people, the reason they already have all the power, they're pretty much the only voice that matters. And the reason all the minority groups have sprouted up is because they're trying to get to the same level, the same equality. is most white people are always afforded. So, I mean, you know, if you're a black person, how do you go into a courthouse with a Confederate statue in front of it and think you're going to be treated fairly? Thank you.
Mike, before you go, did you see that story about the statue being pulled down in Durham, North Carolina, and what did you think about it? We lost Mike. Smith is in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Line for those under 30. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you for taking my call. Just a quick one. I'm an immigrant, just like the second caller who said he's been here since 1994 and all that. And sometimes I think we have some good insight. Okay, now this is what I think. We need to take it back to where it started. It started from slavery, where we had the slave masters and all that. So I think now the police have a lot to play to solve this. We're in the techie age right now. I think this police should try and relate more to the people, because back then when I was back in my country, racism in America, I see it on TV from the police angle. So right now, slavery was a conscious effort. There was a force. There was an action. So there should be a conscious effort to solve this. Starting from the police angle. They should go out. There should be a movement. Take selfies with people. Show love consciously. It should be something conscious effort. Okay, let's see this. Let's create a platform. And also, there are some groups like Black Lives Matter. Sometimes groups like this make the matter worse. Because when you tell me Black Lives Matter, the first thing that comes to my head is you're taking me back to the slave age sometimes, because every life matters. Yes, when you say Black Lives Matter, the picture that comes to my mind is racism.
Smith, what country did you immigrate from?
From Nigeria.
And were there this kind of hate groups there?
Yeah, of course, Boko Haram and other the Boko Haram and some other stuff. Yeah, they were hate group. You understand? But they were basically based on politics and all that. You understand, from the north and the south and all that. But from what I see in America, it has to be conscious. Like I said, conscious effort. Groups like all this, take down the name forget about Black Lives Matter. Every life matters. Because, like I said, when you call it by the name, what comes to your mind is freedom and slavery. Oh, we matter. So we're still fighting it. We're still fighting it. We're still trying to fight it. No, every life matter. Eradicate the name. Delete it from our hard disk. You understand? And then, like I said, the slave masters now are the police. They are the one with the force and the gun. So they should start conscious effort, like go out, take selfies, show love.
Got your point, Smith. Lee is in Cleveland, Ohio. Line for those 30 to 50 years old. Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
Doing well.
Great. Hey, there's a couple of points that I just wanted to make. I've been listening for a while this morning, and I hear a lot of your guests saying some of the same things, but I don't really hear them answering one of your questions, which is, what is the alternative? We know that there's racism existing, and if you say you don't know or you act like you don't know, then that's a farce. It's been going on for a significant amount of time. Why are the hate groups on the rise? I feel like they're trying to antagonize the bear. Minorities in this country are representative or indicative of a bear, a sleeping giant. I believe, like one of your other callers stated, that if black people, brown people, minorities in general became emboldened or empowered in this country, that there is a real fear of that. Why is there a fear of that? Because I don't want to share with somebody who I don't necessarily agree with, whom I don't necessarily like, who I think may overpower me in many ways. With that point, equality is a joke. Why is it a joke? Because the judicial system is in collaboration with the bureaucracies in this country, and that's what's keeping minorities disenfranchised. Nobody wants to talk about what is the alternative. For me, the alternative is to stop making such a stringent application process when we apply for jobs. Stop making it so difficult for us to take care of our families. Stop making it so difficult for us to express how we feel about politics and what's going on in America. It's such a shame that white nationalist groups can march in Charlottesville, Virginia, and blacks can't even go out and march when brothers are getting shot in the streets and saying, hey, this is wrong, without having military forces being brought upon them. I think that these are some of the critical issues that we must address in this country if we're going to ever try to strive to be a multicultural and diverse nation. Again, it's a joke if we don't do this. Now, my last point I want to make is what Jimmy Fallon said the other night. He said that if you sit up and you know that racism is existing, you know that these inequalities are happening, and you're a white person and you do nothing, that is just as bad as being a part of those white nationalist groups. And I want to end with that. Thank you for my time.
Robert, Frostburg, Maryland, line for those 50 and older. Good morning.
Yes, sir. Good morning. How you doing?
Doing well.
Let me try to resolve this whole issue about what is going on. People in our country don't see the big picture. I have lived 74 years, and in only 4 of those 74 years have I felt totally free, and that's when I lived in the Far East. But what I learned when I was in the Far East is Western European white imperial supremacy and North American white imperial supremacy. From 1898 to 1975, every country in the Far East drove white imperial supremacy, capitalism out of control over their lives. Every single one. In the Middle East, from India with Gandhi and with Egypt and all of the other Middle Eastern countries, white imperial supremacy, exploitation was driven out. 53 countries in Africa, with South Africa being the last in 1993. White imperial supremacy, exploitation of economic, taking advantage of people.
Robert, we're running out of time here. Take us to 2017 in the United States.
2017 is this. This mentality that we live with in this country has been so ingrained for greed that people don't even know who the hell they are anymore in this country. White, black. It isn't the poor white guy's fault. He's been exploited just like the poor black guy. The people who make the money are the ones that's creating this problem. And these other people are victims, minorities. They're just the victims. The poor whites, just the victims. They keep this scenario going for money purpose. For the love of money is the root of all evil. That's going to be the destruction of this country.
Robert, our last caller in this segment of today's Washington Journal. But coming up, we'll get an on-the-ground perspective on that recent violence in Charlottesville from Joe Thomas, a conservative radio show host in the city.
Washington Journal continues.
Joe Thomas joins us now, a host and programming director for Charlottesville, Virginia's WCHV Radio. Joins us to discuss how his city became ground zero for this past weekend's white nationalist demonstration and the subsequent violence. But first, Mr. Thomas, so much focus in the past 72 hours about what the president did and didn't say, and then that statement yesterday. Want to get your thoughts first on that debate over the president's words.
Well, the first thing I wanted to point out is that I think the president was correct in saying all violence in any shape or form, any of this mob rule mentality has to be called out for what it is and has to be stopped in its tracks, because if it doesn't, we're going to get further and further down this rabbit hole. So the fact that he didn't pick out one specific group, suppose he had just picked out the Antifa and Black Lives Matter groups that were protesting on the other side, equally violent. I was there for 4 hours getting pepper sprayed by both groups. So there was plenty of violence to go around.
Give us some background on this battle over the monument in Charlottesville, Virginia. How did this happen in Charlottesville this weekend?
Well, the battle began because it was an issue brought up after the shooting in South Carolina in the church there. And after that, one of our city councilors said, boy, wouldn't it be nice if we could get rid of all of these Confederate symbols? Because remember, the shooter had Confederate flags and there was pictures on his Facebook page. So it became a villain at that point, a flashpoint. But it actually goes back to just shortly after Occupy Wall Street, where we had somewhat of an encampment at that same park for almost 2 weeks during Occupy Wall Street. And the first calls for removing that statue happened just shortly after that.
And how divisive has this been for the city of Charlottesville? How has the city handled it?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
How divisive has this been for the city of Charlottesville? How has the city handled this issue?
I don't know if it's been divisive for the city of Charlottesville as much as it's been divisive for people who are looking to use this as a means to an end. We've seen an awful lot of folks who are trying to gain public policy or public position off of this issue, and therefore they're using it for their own ends. The average citizen, 86% of the city of Charlottesville had no problem with leaving Robert E. Lee's statue right where it is. And quite honestly, when you poll them, they say there are bigger issues in the city of Charlottesville.
Is there a history of white supremacists targeting Charlottesville?
No, none at all. As a matter of fact, we have a human rights commission that's been in construction for several years, and they just, within the last 2 or 3 months, made a report to the very same city councilors you've seen on the news and said they've been in action for 16 months and have found no cases of human rights violations in the city of Charlottesville. This isn't a Charlottesville issue. This is a lot of people using Charlottesville and its issues, some of them internally. Some of our local politicians have certainly gained a national standing for it, but I think it's a lot of platform building.
We're talking with Joe Thomas of WCHV in Charlottesville, having this conversation this morning for about the next 25 minutes or so. If you want to join into the conversation, Republicans, it's 202-748-8001. Democrats, 202-748-8000. Independents, 202-748-8002. Special line for Charlottesville residents in this segment of our program, 202-748-8003. As you're calling in, Joe Thomas, take us through your day. You mentioned you were out there on Saturday, what you saw, why you were out there.
Well, part of what we saw while we were out there was violence. It was anger, and it was ginned up by people who weren't there, honestly. The people who wound up so angry, what really puzzled me is that once you separated them from the mob mentality, that calmed down. But as long as they were in the group think, they were in this hypersensitive state of, I'm in a mob and I've got to just go along with the mob. And then when you separated them from that, I had personal experience with a young man from Black Lives Matter who nearly came to blows with me because, with all irony, he saw the color of my skin and said, "You must be a racist."
What's the End Division Unity Coalition?
That is a group started by several of us here in Charlottesville under the guidance of a former GOP chair, or former Democratic Party chair, former Democratic Party candidate for Congress, and myself, and many community leaders, including one of the great community leaders in the most impoverished parts of Charlottesville, Mary Carey. We've met a couple of times on that to try to bring back the idea of talking to one another, because truly the only way, in my view anyway, that you undo the mobocracy, as one of my callers mentioned, is to talk to each other one at a time. And if I can insert something really quickly, you had a caller on right before we went on that was talking about poverty. And he was right on the money, because this isn't about black and white as much as it's green. You've got poor white kids being told their situation is because this group did them, and then poor black kids being told their situation is because this group did them dirty. And that's where this issue has come from. And that's what's given the kindling to it.
Well, let's let you talk with some of the callers. Larry's up first in Fort Calhoun, Nebraska. Line for Republicans. Larry, you're on with Joe Thomas. Larry, you with us?
I noticed last night that, you have your kids come home from college, and they tell you what they learned from college at the evening dinner. They say, Dad's a racist, Dad's a bigot, a homophobe, a fascist. And then he goes and he watches the evening news, and the evening news calls him a bigot, a homophobe, a racist. And then he wants to watch a little Tonight Show or something like that. And these guys are preaching about how he's a racist, a bigot, and a homophobe. And also, too, I was wondering this question. I wanted somebody to answer this question. What's the difference between yelling fire in a movie theater and what the media is doing on the news every day? Aren't they just kind of inflaming hate? I mean, I have never seen this before in the media. I think the media is so disgusting right now. It should hang its head in shame. trying to bear false witness against our president, make him look like a racist. I'd like to know your opinion on that.
Mr. Thomas.
Well, I can't disagree with the fact that people are running around for their own ends, and there's plenty of that in the media. I've been in the media for 31 years, and I know for a fact that we are about pay attention to us, and if we can get you to stay through to the next commercial break, we'll do it. And it is easy. And that's where it begins. We're wired with weaknesses, and one of them is sloth. And that weakness is, I think, what is feeding all this is, Larry, is that it's easier for us to get a group of people to support us if we just divide them. But it's much harder to go in and find commonality amongst one another one at a time. Yeah, the media is definitely crying fire in a crowded movie theater. And as a free speech issue, even if you can do that, you have to bear the responsibility for that. And that's what I don't think is happening, is I don't think there's as much responsibility. I would like to see, as we have rules regarding publications that might publish lies and libelous statements, we seem to not apply those to places like Facebook and Twitter and places where you can publish stuff and nobody is held accountable. But if you publish a book or a blog or a pamphlet on Harper Ross imprint, and I'm not even sure they're really a publisher, but you understand what I'm saying, and then it's found out that you were lying, well, that publisher is also liable for what you've said.
So was media coverage of what happened in Charlottesville fair?
Well, yeah, I'm not going to say it was fair because there was an awful lot of coverage of the Unite the Right group and not as much of the Antifa and Black Lives Matter groups that were all equally as violent. And I want to make something very clear. We're seeing two groups that are, in one case, nationalist socialist, and in another case, globalist socialist. But these are not right-wing groups. These are, in both cases, looking for greater government control to fix their problems, neither of which is truly as defined a conservative principle.
Mobile, Alabama. Eric is waiting. Line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning. What happened in Virginia was an act of terrorism, in my opinion, done by a terrorist. Groups like neo-Nazis and the KKK have committed domestic terrorism, and it just seems like in America you have to have a brown face or not to be a non-Christian in order to be labeled as a terrorist, and it's just confusing to me.
Well, and I think what you're getting at, if I could jump in on this, is what happens when you start to try to put the toothpaste back in the tube. What government has tried to do since the 60s, and it depends on whether you go back to some of Lyndon Johnson's tapes about mollification of the black community specifically, but in general, the poor community, was the idea that they, somehow could fix something that went wrong in the past with something that's going to happen in the future. And as you go down this route, you've now established precedent that government is going to pick or choose a class. Look at the case out of Texas. University of Texas was found to be violating the civil rights of students because they were picking certain students based on the color of their skin. And once you remove black, white, Latino, or Asian from the conversation, you just say, do you support the idea of somebody being able to pick and choose who gets something based solely on the color of their skin or predominantly on the color of their skin? You've opened up a Pandora's box that our Constitution was never designed to deal with.
Buckeye, Arizona. Jack and Independent, good morning.
Good morning. Hey, thanks for taking my call. Hey, the first issue is, let's not forget here real quick, this was a horrible thing what happened, and my prayers are with those families of those officers and the woman that died. Mm-hmm. But let's look at Berkeley. Okay, let's look at all the Black Lives, pigs in a blanket fund like they can. Let's look at all these issues under Obama where they created all this fire and all these police officers killed, okay? That creates a lot of this controversy, and then all of a sudden you throw in this white supremacy thing, and then sooner or later, this just boiling over. And let's not forget the first thing, why this president got elected. When you look at that map, it's red all over the middle of America. And there's a lot of people that are white, black, brown, everything in that part of red America that said, you know, we're sick and tired of all these issues because all these big protests, look at Berkeley, Chicago, New York, all these people, they're working for their livelihood to put food on the table. And the media has taken this so far out of control, like the one gentleman said, okay, that put this into a flame issue. It's an absolute flame. The travesty of 5 different networks every day, Russia, Trump did this, everything wrong. You know, if they do not cool their jets in this thing, this white supremacy in the Charlottesville thing, I'm sorry to say, okay, this may just be the beginning, and I hope my words are wrong.
Mr. Thomas.
From your lips to God's ears, absolutely. I hope you're wrong, but I believe that once you've started to segregate, you've now created segregation again, and we're seeing the same sort of animus and that same fear that I'm not going to be able to get by, I'm not going to be able to feed my family if I don't protest, if I don't march, if I don't gather together. Pardon me, still some vestiges of the tear gas I got hit with on Saturday. But beyond, you know, what you talk about is, you know, Barack Obama had a very poignant tweet after this event in Charlottesville where he quoted Nelson Mandela about hate. But then when you take actions away from the words are easily said. Actions are what's different. And what we've seen as we've gone further and further down this rabbit hole is the actions don't match the words. And what you want to see is jobs. You want to see the ability to feed your family. And that's why President Trump carried Michigan, Pennsylvania, and there are people who make a very reasonable case that some of this is being driven by the people who lost those states, who didn't expect to lose those states because, gosh, I mean, these are our people. You know, they were guaranteed, you know, these votes and they didn't get them. And I think that's a bigger issue right now is, you know, why are we dividing the country along these racial lines? And is it just for political gain? I was struck, and I wrote a column on my Facebook page about this, that I was struck that this almost seems like if we could go back to 18th century France and the beginnings of the French Revolution. I started the column by saying Thomas Jefferson was wrong on the French Revolution because what was happening, you had elites who wanted to be king. You had a king that was not governed by the rule of law like Magna Carta did in England. And you had this blood sport for 25 years that left you with a military strongman named Napoleon whose jobs program was to take all of these militants, put them in the army and take a hike to Moscow. We don't want to go there, but I'm afraid that is historically what happens to these free societies when they collapse.
Thomas Jefferson was wrong. A dangerous thing to say in Charlottesville. To bring the focus back to Charlottesville, what do you think the short-term and long-term impacts are going to be in your city in the wake of what we saw on Saturday?
Well, we have a city council election coming up in November, along with the entirety of the Virginia General Assembly is up for election. And there's an awful lot of the campaigning that has gone on that has been, so-and-so is a Republican, so therefore so-and-so is Trump. But we have some very common sense people running for city council who I hope separate themselves from this. Because it's the only way we're going to do this. I'm a conservative talk radio station, and I did a live broadcast from the housing projects. And I'm the one doing this because that's where the people need the help. And that's where the people aren't being listened to. The jobs leave, the jobs don't come back, and the poor community is found with ostensibly just hoping they can find a better paying convenience store job, or maybe Old Navy is hiring and they pay a little better, or Walmart. We've lost the manufacturing side of our economy. We've lost a lot of things that are a bigger issue than whether there's a Civil War monument in one of the parks in central Charlottesville. And that's what really I find bothersome, because one of the city councilors, we don't elect these offices individually like that city in Michigan. We do an at-large election, which I believe the city in Michigan was found to be in violation of the Voting Rights Act, and I would like to see that investigated here. But our vice mayor ran on a campaign of helping the poor. And that's Wes Bellamy, who you've seen on a lot of the TV shows. Yet his votes have increased business taxes on an average of 65%. We have cases where they've gone up 400%. That's also on rental properties, driving up the rents of the poor. He then voted to raise the utility fees that the city manages on the poor people. It's insane that the words can say I'm out to help the poor, but then the actions aren't, and we're just creating greater schisms.
Special line for Charlottesville residents as we're having this discussion, 202-748-8003. Joe Thomas is our guest talk radio host there in Charlottesville with WCHV Radio. Teresa is in Dandridge, Tennessee. Line for Republicans. Teresa, good morning.
Good morning. The guy before me stole every bit of my thunder about the difference between Black Lives Matter. We've been putting up with Black Lives Matter for years when the Democrats and Obama create them, and Antifa. How do the Democrats are supporting this to get votes? How do they think they're going to win elections on this platform of hate and violence? Black Lives Matter is what helped Trump get elected. That's why whites came out in historic levels, because we're being discriminated against. We're being punched and hit in jobs and being called racist. How is this platform going to work for the Democrats? And I think that's what's all behind it. And then did you see in this state while you were there that they were being herded into Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and cops stood down?
You're talking about here in Charlottesville?
I believe she was.
Well, nobody was herded. What there was crowd control barricades put up. The police really, there is still an investigation as to whether there were orders given as to whether the police would intercede where fistfights happened. There were many instances in front of me where fisticuffs broke out and nobody interceded. It wasn't until the tear gas came out of the park where Robert E. Lee's statue is that they called off the Unite the Right rally. And then they were pushed together, and the former Democratic chair in Charlottesville, Dave Norris, and I were standing together at the time, and he looked at me and said, why are they pushing the two groups together? It seemed from reporting on the scene that there was an attitude of let's force everyone into the same space and see what happens. I doubt if that was all the goal of it. But beyond that, she asked about the political strategy of doing this. Donald Trump did a lot better in the black community than Mitt Romney did or other people did, and that's part of why he carried Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio, because he went to black churches. He sat down with black leaders. I asked this question of a caller earlier on the radio program. How can you say that Donald Trump is a white supremacist? He's employed millions of people over 30 or 40 years prior to running for president, and in a year and a half, nobody could be found that would stand up and say, he treated me badly because of my race. You'd think any business that's in business for 5 months could run into something like that. So I don't buy the idea that the president is a white supremacist. He was tainted this, if you remember the timeline, when David Duke said, I support the president, I like Donald Trump, and everyone said, well, denounce him. At some point or another, we could all run around and denounce everybody. I denounce what David Duke stands for. Anyone who does not believe all men are created equal, which was written by Jefferson. And when I said he was wrong, I meant that one time on the French Revolution. But when Jefferson sat down in Charlottesville and thought about this and then went to Philadelphia and wrote that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I said this to British radio the other day. If you don't believe that, you're not an American conservative. And that's where David Duke and all these folks who say white supremacy and white European privilege or status and all of that nonsense has to go. We were the first place to throw that off.
You talk about the focus on the president's words. We started this conversation with that. David Duke, he said, a report from NBC, we are going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believe in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump, because he said he's going to take our country back. Go ahead.
if somebody calls into Washington Journal right now or calls WCHV right now and they're a white supremacist, does that make me a white supremacist because somebody who listens to this program is a white supremacist, or somebody who's got a WCHV bumper sticker on their car also has a Black Lives Matter bumper sticker on their car? Does that mean I'm a Black Lives Matter supporter? It's this guilt by association that as an armchair sociologist, I find offensive, because you're, again, stigmatizing somebody based on something that has nothing to do with you ever getting to know them.
Talking with Joe Thomas of WCHV Radio. Just a couple minutes left. I want to get to as many of your calls as we can. Charles is in Fort Collins, Colorado. Line for Independence. Go ahead.
I'd have to disagree with Joe on a few points here on this about, if David Duke came out and said to me, Charles Perry, I'm behind him 100%. I'm doing this because of his whatever. I would be like, heck no. Are you crazy? And that's the first things that come out of my mouth. It wouldn't take me 2 days to come up with some political thing. I mean, that's speaking from the heart. Somebody says you're associated. I find that just completely not calling balls and strikes. And I think a lot of this is, and I agree with Joe on points of, a lot of this is tribalism, and it's people coming out, and you can't talk to them. And I think we've created a system of us against them, which benefits the rich and benefits Wall Street and these kind of people, where we're bickering over a bunch of stuff like this, and they're stealing everything.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. But to my point is, if David Duke came up to you and said, I like what you stand for, or I want to do an ad for your business or whatever it is, you have that information. When Donald Trump was hit with the statement, David Duke endorsed you, what do you say about that? He doesn't know what David Duke said. It's not like he's got a hotline to him. So as Tim Kaine would, he probably said, I've got to get a handle on this, and he didn't say anything about it. It's interesting how we can allow a seasoned politician who probably is better at the dance to dodge that kind of guilt by association by saying, oh, I don't know about that. I'll have to get back to you about that. And but I appreciate your point. Yeah, but if somebody says to you, hey, somebody says he likes you, and you don't have any evidence to that effect, you're going to want to gather that info.
Danny, Silver Spring, Maryland, line for Republicans. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing? I want to talk about the taking down of the monuments. You know who else likes to take down statues and stuff? Is ISIS. They love to destroy statues and erase the past. I think that taking down these statues kind of opens up a wound in the South. It's like the second humiliation of the South. They were humiliated when they lost the war, and now they're getting humiliated again. See, Lincoln wanted to unify the South, heal them. Taking down these statues doesn't heal anybody.
Mr. Thomas, in our last minute.
He's absolutely right. Lincoln actually said these are American veterans. This is an American War Veterans Memorial, and that's why there's a Virginia law that actually says you can't take it down. And there's a group called the Monument Fund, look them up on Facebook, that has actually successfully got a court order that says it's not coming down. Now, our fear is somebody's going to do what they did in North Carolina last night and take them down civilianly, but otherwise, no, they're not going anywhere.
Joe Thomas is a radio host with WCHV Radio. If you want to check him out online, WCHV.com. Appreciate the time this morning.
No, thank you very much for including us here on C-SPAN.
Up next this